Women.
Coffee does some crazy shit to people.
Milk! Creamer! 1 pound sugar!
If it weren't for inflation, I'd be at Starbucks every day. Well, not Starbucks. Working there for a year kind of changed my perspective on that whole thing. I peered into that dark abyss, and I saw the gluttonous consumers we are. So I started making my own coffee at home. Cold brew with half and half and creamer. It's pretty good. I even bought some washable plastic cups with straws. It's meant to emulate that rewarding feeling, pulling through McDonald's for some of that dirty bean water. If you've been around my channel long enough, you might be saying, what the sigma? Coffee? How does coffee fit under the umbrella of mental health? Oh, young child, there is much to learn. Learning how to brew your own coffee can be a great asset to you. It's a skill that's relatively cheap to learn, and it pays in dividends. Literally hundreds of dollars a year can be spared when you learn to make this stuff at home. So let's take a break from the men are lonely and chlamydia's a bitch type content for a little while. Today, I just want to talk about my personal comfort topic, coffee. But you know what isn't a bitch? My Patreon. Free video updates, live stream notifications, high quality downloads of channel art. We just added these really cool 4K wallpapers. I think they look really nice. Link is in the description. Also, check out this fan art made by our wonderful artists in the Lavender Candles community. Thanks to my coffee addiction for sponsoring today's video.
Before time began.
We're not entirely sure how coffee got its start, but we have one main theory. 9th century, the Ethiopian plateau. According to legend, a goat herder named Kaldi was the first to consume coffee beans. Well, we should really be giving credit to Kaldi's goats, since they were the ones that ate the berries and experienced a burst of energy. Kaldi noticed this and took his discovery to the abbot of the local monastery. This abbot struggled to stay awake during long hours of evening prayer. Sounds like a big fucking skill issue. Well, he took these berries and made a drink, which energized him as it did the goats. After this, knowledge of the magical energy berries began to escape the monastery. It would take like 600 years for coffee to properly be taken advantage of. In the 15th century, coffee culture began as it was cultivated and traded for the first time. The beans were being grown in what is now Yemen, and after another century of waiting, it made its way to Iran, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. At this point in history, coffee was something you enjoyed on an individual basis. Give you a little boost, that's it. But the drink's reputation was starting to spread, and those productivity-obsessed cultures would soon start to wield its immense power. Coffee houses began to spring up in the Middle East. At these thriving social hubs, one might listen to music, chat with their friends, watch performances, play chess, and discuss the news, all while sipping their coffee. This specific form of social interaction became such a cornerstone of the culture that the coffee houses would be known as schools of the wise. Think about that the next time you're sipping on your pumpkin spice latte. How many brain cells do you think are present in this room? But I guess I'm one to talk. Coffee is a pretty sweet invention, and soon, it would take the world by storm. The 17th century sees the drink digging its mitts into European culture as well. The funny thing is, not everyone embraced the drink right away, as it had happened in other areas. Some approached the new drink with intense suspicion, calling it the bitter invention of Satan. When coffee got to Venice in 1615, the local clergy there condemned it, echoing the sentiments of these anti-coffee Karens. The controversy was so massive that the current Pope, Pope Clement VIII, had been requested to intervene. I tried to research this guy to come up with a joke like, ooh, the guy that had sex with a paraplegic squirrel was the same guy who baptized coffee. You know, there's always something funny about every pope. I learned that in high school. Pope Stephen VI dug up a corpse and put him on trial. Pope John XII turned the papal residence into a brothel. But nothing, I've got no dirt on this guy. Clement is clean. Anyway, he tried coffee for himself, and he loved it so much, he gave it God's good old seal of approval. One free coffee with every indulgence sold. Despite the rough patch that coffee had had in Europe, European coffee houses began to spring up. England, Austria, France, Germany, and Holland became the coffee capitals. What? All those countries became the coffee capitals of the Western world. They were referred to as penny universities, because you could purchase a cup of coffee for only 1 penny. Inflation, man, it's a bitch. At this time, the most common breakfast beverages were alcohol, beer and wine. Neither of these had the reputation of sharpening your mind or giving you energy. As you may remember, that guy's abbot drank coffee during evening prayers, so the concept of drinking it in the morning to start your day was something new. But that's what people started doing. Start your day off with a burst of energy. Hey, look at me, I wake up every morning at 5 a.m. I must have the perfect life. They tried to pull the same trick with Pepsi, didn't work out too well. Anyway, coffee being associated with the morning grind set is how it became known as the workplace beverage. By the mid-17th century, these penny universities numbered over 300 in London alone. They started to become specialized, attracting specific crowds. The artists, the merchants, the business majors. Speaking of business, this marks the beginning of coffee's business era, sis. Suddenly, the concoction had its own distinct identity. It was a thing you could create an entire industry out of, and this industry would soon spread further than just Arabia. The Dutch would get their turn next. First, they tried to grow them in India. They tried again in Indonesia. Better. But they would really get their gears greased when they got to the island of Java. The trees thrived in this new climate, and the Dutch finally had something to trade. They expanded this production further to the islands of Sumatra and Sulawesi. Sure. Java, Sumatra? Sound familiar? We can credit the first ever blend of coffee to the Dutch as well. They combined Arabian coffee with coffee grown on Java. This blend is called Mocha Java.
I never went to Ovo Java.
As Mocha is the name of a city in Yemen. Today, we have many different blends of coffee, and it's surprising that it took someone this long to mix two types together. In 1714, the mayor of Amsterdam presented a gift of a young coffee tree to King Louis XIV of France. Pleased with this gift, the king ordered it to be planted in the Royal Botanical Garden of Paris. A few years later, a young naval officer obtained one of the seedlings from this tree and transported it to the Americas. Thankfully, this single seedling thrived in the region, proliferating the coffee trees across the continent. The tree grew especially well in the Caribbean, as well as South and Central America. Actually, though, for South America, the spread was a bit more difficult. You see, the French were a little stingy with this bean. Not surprising.
They are a bunch of treacherous, lamb-burning, work-shy peasants.
A Portuguese military officer named Francisco de Mello Paleta was quite handsome, and he charmed the pants off of the French governor's wife. As a present for cucking the governor hardcore, his wife gave him a bouquet of flowers before he left. Inside the bouquet was a bundle of coffee seeds, enough to start coffee production in South America. It's pretty incredible how this plant is able to spread with just a handful of successful crops. I mean, for North America, all they needed was one single seed. Pretty awesome. But what about tea? Wasn't that like a huge thing at the time? It was, in fact, still the beverage of choice in the New World. That was until King George imposed a heavy tax on it in 1773, and we all know how that ended. Fun fact, don't ask a British person about the Boston Tea Party. Tried this once, didn't end well. I guess it's still seen as like a national tragedy, even though no one died. Whatever. This tea tax influenced the switch from tea to coffee. By the start of the 19th century, coffee had become one of the most valuable commodities, second only to crude oil. Coffee becomes a cornerstone of society. You have numerous coffee shops in every city in Europe, America, the Middle East. Coffee is one of the few commonalities enjoyed between the nations, which explains the vast coffee empires we see today. The way we drink coffee has evolved from a productivity-increasing sludge to a decadent Instagram post. Businessmen run on coffee, the government runs on coffee, millennials sure do run on Starbucks. It's not an exaggeration to say that without coffee, America just ceases to function. We're lucky that the coffee plant is so versatile. We can grow it here, and it isn't largely impacted by tariffs. At least, I don't think so. I kinda just pulled that factoid out of my rectum.
I bought this shit because I thought it looked funny, but I think I'm legitimately gonna get a heart attack.
One of the most notable changes to coffee culture is its ever-expanding complexity. First, you had dirty bean water, but pretty soon you move into different roasts, brewing machines, and flavor profiles. To understand how to make the perfect cup of coffee, one must graduate from the basic drip coffee enjoyer to cold brew creator. There's a lot that goes into this, and you're about to learn more about it than you ever thought you would. First, the characteristics. Not all coffee tastes the same, and noticing the subtle differences is actually really difficult. These differences include acidity, aroma, body, astringency, bitterness, and the finish. When you hear the word acidic, you might think of something like lemons.
I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemon.
Just because a coffee tastes acidic doesn't mean it tastes like lemons. It's something that's experienced on an individual level. You know, the average person can just tell when something is acidic. It's hard to describe. A coffee's acidity is generally determined by its roast. Lighter roasts will be the most acidic, and darker roasts will be less so. I'm someone who has acid reflux, which means I want to stay away from those highly acidic foods and beverages. And that's why I like my coffee dark. Aroma is an olfactory component. How strong is the smell of that coffee? The aroma is generally determined by the type of roast as well. As the roast becomes darker and darker, the aroma becomes stronger and stronger. So, to recap, light roasts more acidic, muted aromas, and darker roasts are less acidic with a stronger smell. So there's a trade-off with every type of roast. Now the body of the coffee is a little more complicated. Full body coffee versus light body coffee is like comparing whole milk to skim milk. It's kind of a matter of how thick it feels on your tongue. Astringency is one that I've never heard before, so this is a new term for me. But as I understand it, astringency is kind of a catch-all term for just a bad brew of coffee. It's vocab that has some negative connotations, meaning something's just not hitting right. You know, the roast was bad, the brewing was bad, the coffee came out stale tasting. It's an effect that's hard to describe, but you can immediately tell, because it gives a physical response from the drinker. You'd know if you had an astringent cup of coffee, it just tastes like doo-doo water. Bitterness is similar to astringency. You can reduce bitterness by brewing lighter roasts of coffee. The actual, chemical compounds that cause bitterness are sort of locked away inside the bean, and the more this compound is released, the more bitter the coffee will taste. It wouldn't be entirely accurate to say that bitter is the opposite of acidic, but it might as well be. Lastly, the finish. The finish of your coffee is the aftertaste. It's a key component of testing the full flavor of the drink. A good finish is pleasant, clean, but a bad brew will give you a sour aftertaste. The finish is impacted by flavor notes as well. You know, adding certain flavorful ingredients will come through in the aftertaste, after our taste buds adjust to the strong flavor of coffee itself. It's also generally advised among the coffee heads to aim for a longer finish. Relatable? Oh! If you're like me, you hear all that and think, what a load of barnacles. It's all kind of wishy-washy and dependent on the experiences of the person drinking the coffee. This guy says it tastes bitter, the other says it tastes acidic. I would agree with you, but the fact is, we can sort of predict how people will react to the taste of their coffee based on the roast. Speaking of which, roasting coffee beans transforms its physical properties. They actually all start out green. As they absorb more and more heat, they double in size and shift to a brown hue. As this process continues, the produced coffee will become less acidic, more bitter, and fuller in body. You can roast coffee beans in a number of ways. In the frying pan, on a grill, in the oven, and of course, specialized coffee roasting machines. Once the beans are roasted to the desired setting, the entire bean is ground up into coffee grounds. The fineness of this grind will strongly affect the brewing process, which is when you run water through the grounds and into a container. The longer you run the water through your coffee grounds, the coarser the grind. As my source puts it, beans that are too finely ground for the brewing method in which they are used will expose too much surface area to the heated water and produce a bitter, harsh, over-extracted taste. At the other extreme, An overly coarse grind will produce weak coffee unless more is used. A finer grind can make for efficient coffee production using less grounds. However, too fine a grind will cause the water to become trapped inside the filter, which ruins the entire dang process. There are 4 methods for grinding: burr grinding, chopping, pounding, and roller grinding. Burr grinding involves breaking down the bean between 2 abrasive elements smashing into each other, like 2 wheels. This method creates minimal heat and a somewhat even grind. This can make the coffee taste richer and smoother. Chopping the beans using blades is a cheaper method, but it produces an uneven and inconsistent grind. Chopped coffee beans are utilized in cheaper drip coffee makers, not espresso machines. Because of the finer process of grinding espresso, chopped beans could cause an espresso machine to become clogged with coffee dust. Pounding coffee is used in Arabic and Greek coffee, which demand that the grounds be so fine that they actually turn into a powder. You use a mortar and a pestle. It's the best way to pound coffee beans. A roller grinder is the more expensive option. A pair of corrugated rollers produces an extremely consistent grind. Because of their cost, they're almost exclusively used by industrial coffee producers. I mean, look, I don't expect anybody to be grinding their own beans. I would recommend just getting them at the store. You will need to know which grounds you need though. Different drinks call for different grounds, which you'll see here in a bit. Now, on to brewing. Proper brewing of coffee requires using the correct amount of coffee grounds, extracted to the correct degree, largely determined by the correct time, at the correct temperature. This is where a large part of coffee variation is introduced. Brewing is a somewhat simple process. The soluble flavors are extracted from the grounds when they're dissolved in water. But these factors will influence the flavor. Now, there is a formula for brewing based on extraction, strength, and brew ratio, but it's a bit too technical for this video. What I want you to take away from this is that the strength of your coffee largely depends on the grounds to water ratio. The standard American drip coffee brews at a ratio of 55 grams of coffee for every liter of water. That's pretty good. Norwegians brew their coffee a bit stronger at 63 grams per liter of water. If you want to talk real strength, turn your attention to the proportions of espresso, 280 grams of coffee per liter. However, this is a little deceiving, as it's not very common to brew that much espresso at once. You'd be tweaking. Because of its strength, you'll typically see espresso brewed at amounts as low as a few ounces. Normal coffee has around 40 milligrams of caffeine per 100 grams of coffee, while espresso has 5 times that amount. We'll get into the differences between coffee and espresso later in the video, but for now, understand that all of this comes from the same coffee bean. There's no espresso bean. The difference only comes from the methods of grinding and brewing. Coffee grounds can be brewed in several different ways, depending on how water is introduced. Drip brewed coffee is produced by hot water passing slowly over roasted, ground coffee beans contained in a filter. Water seeps through the grounds, coming out the other end having absorbed the oils and flavors of the grounds. Those grounds are then disposed of. Throw that shit away immediately.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
Drip brewing is one of the cheapest ways to produce coffee. Those machines that you see in office buildings, those are drip coffee machines, and they're meant to produce a lot of coffee very quickly for a large number of people. You might have heard of something called a French press. This is a special machine that requires a coarser grind of coffee than a drip brewer. The ground coffee is placed in an empty beaker, then you add extremely hot water, around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly boiling. A good starting point for a French press coffee ratio is 1 gram of coffee to about 15 grams of water. After approximately 4 minutes of combination, the plunger is pressed to separate the grounds and hold them at the bottom of the beaker. The remaining coffee is then poured. It's a similar process to drip coffee, except the water is removed in a slightly different fashion. Now, cold brewing is a common method of obtaining homemade iced coffee. Coffee grounds are mixed together with cold water and are left to set for 12 to 24 hours. The mixture is then strained through a cheesecloth or other filter and placed into a bottle, refrigerated for several days. Back in the day, I used to make lattes by mixing my espresso with milk and creamer. It was okay, but always sort of lukewarm. I've since switched to making my own cold brew at home, as I feel it leads to a much colder coffee and it blends in the creamer a bit easier. It's actually closer to what most fast food coffee tastes like. Many coffee houses and coffee chains create iced coffee by simply pouring hot coffee over ice, which will water down the coffee over time, creating a cheap and watery taste. Flash brewing gets around this problem. In flash brewing, a smaller amount of hot water is used and the coffee is dripped directly over ice, which immediately cools the coffee down. So instead of waiting for all that hot coffee to collect together, the ice is used to cool it down before it can accumulate. Flash brewing is a good method for preserving the unique flavor and acidity of the coffee. For a more personalized brewing experience, talented coffee experts may choose to enjoy pour-over coffee. This type of brewing is by far the most straightforward. Pour hot water over the grounds. No lengthy processes, just straight through. This grants a lot of control over the strength of the coffee. No more fiddling with the settings on automatic coffee machines. However, the filters for pour-over coffee are somewhat expensive. For the less inclined, like myself, single-serve coffee makers automate this process. Measure out the desired amount, pour your grounds into the reusable filter, and bam, 1 cup of coffee. Rather than making an entire batch, single-serve machines just make 1 cup. If you're one of those sophisticated types, you might want to use a percolator. Percolators brew coffee by continuously pushing boiling hot water bubbles up into the coffee chamber to steep the coffee grains. This cycle is repeated until the coffee is ready to serve. This method requires a heated surface, such as a stovetop. It's best for medium roasts. For espresso, water is pushed through an extremely dense puck of fine coffee grounds. The pressure is immense, reaching upwards of 260 psi. This will produce around 60 milliliters of liquid, and it's served in a small glass. Espressos are often consumed one of 2 ways: by itself as a shot, or mixed together with a large volume of milk to make a latte. Drinking straight espresso is more common in European countries and fancy restaurants. It's not really an American thing. After a meal, wash it all down with an extremely small espresso. There are other methods of brewing that aren't as common. Boiled coffee involves mixing the grounds and water, then bringing this compound to a boil. A vacuum coffee maker brews coffee using 2 chambers, where vapor pressure and gravity produce coffee. Cold drip coffee is when cold water is very slowly dripped onto the grounds, which can then take up to 2 hours to pass through a filter. The reason there's so many methods for brewing coffee is the exhaustive list of regions the coffee tree has been cultivated in. Different regions ended up coming up with different methods, and this allows for a wide variety of coffee beverages as well. But you know what's really cool? Beans. There are 4 types, the first of which is Arabica. Arabica beans are by far the most common and most popular type. Originating from Ethiopia, it's believed that this was the first type of coffee bean ever consumed. It's grown in high elevation areas above sea level, such as the Brazilian rainforests. Arabica beans are unfortunately highly susceptible to diseases contracted through the farming process, jacking up the prices. Depending on who you ask, these beans have the best overall taste, with a sweeter and more complex flavor. Smooth, and about as far away from bitter as you can get. It makes for a great black coffee. In terms of caffeine content, it's definitely not the highest though. Robusta is the second type, cheaper and stronger than Arabica. This unfortunately comes packaged with a bitter punch, which is why it's often used both in espresso and in instant coffee mixes. It's the second most produced coffee bean behind Arabica, and while its taste might be less sophisticated, it's got points in other areas. Its caffeine content is much higher, and since caffeine is a natural insect repellent, Robusta beans are resilient against diseases. The bean itself originated in sub-Saharan Africa, although it's now moved to Africa and Indonesia. It's very attractive to farmers, being much larger and rounder when you compare it to other varieties. Coming in at a distant third, Liberica beans are known for their floral aroma and smoky flavor. They were largely unheard of until the 1800s, when Southeast Asian coffee producers experienced a widespread fungal infection known as coffee rust, and they were forced to make the switch from Arabica. Look, I keep saying the names of these beans. I don't know if I'm pronouncing them incorrectly, but just go with it. Liberica beans only make up a measly 2% of the world's coffee supply, and for good reason. Taste testers have reported the beans, well, for crimes. No. Taste testers have reported that Liberica coffee tastes a bit like Marmite. Yummy! The flavor is unique and harsh, making a less sought-after type of bean. But farmers love to grow it, as it's tolerant of extreme climate fluctuations. Since people generally aren't clamoring for this crop, it's usually bundled with others and sold as a package deal. Now the fourth type, don't even get me started. The Excelsa bean has a really cool name, and an interesting flavor profile. Fruity flavors are front and center in this one, which has actually been classified as a variant of Liberica. Primarily, it's grown in Southeast Asia, and it only represents a small fraction of the world's overall coffee production. It's comparatively lighter in caffeine. Similar to Liberica, these beans are usually mixed into a blend with other beans, providing depth to the overall flavor. If Arabica and Robusta beans are the cake, Liberica and Excelsa are the icing on top. They're usually there to add a bit of nuance and variety to the blend. Anyway, I had fun, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. It was kind of all over the place, I have to admit, but I just love talking about coffee. I've seen your comments asking for longer videos, so even though my voice is not happy to oblige, it's very raspy right now, I'm happy to do it for you. And again, this was fun for me. Seriously, making the switch from iced lattes to cold brew with creamer was the best decision I've ever made, and you should do it. Order on Amazon like a 12-pack of rewashable cups with lids and straws. It'll give you that feeling of rewarding yourself, but you don't actually need to go to McDonald's to get it. You know, I just hope something in this video inspired you to look more into coffee making as a skill, because it's honestly just really fun, experimenting with everything we just talked about. So, comment below if you want more coffee-related content. We've also got a Patreon if you'd like to support me. And that's all for this one. My name is Candles. I love you all. Good night.